There was a time when espionage meant stolen documents, dead drops, intercepted cables, and satellites peering down from orbit. National secrets lived in filing cabinets, government vaults, and encrypted military systems. But that definition of strategic intelligence is changing. The next great intelligence prize is not only found in classified briefings or missile schematics. It may be found inside saliva samples, consumer testing kits, hospital records, research databases, and the microscopic biological code that makes each of us human. That is the chilling premise behind genomic espionage. For decades, DNA was treated primarily as a medical and scientific breakthrough. It promised precision medicine, early disease detection, personalized treatment, ancestry mapping, and a better understanding of human history. It was sold to the public as empowerment through biology. Learn where your family came from. Discover health risks early. Help researchers cure disease. It sounded humane, progressive, and deeply personal. But every transformative technology has a shadow. The same genetic data that can help cure illness can also be exploited for surveillance, coercion, discrimination, and strategic manipulation. In the wrong hands, DNA stops being a tool of health and becomes an instrument of power. And unlike a password, a credit card number, or even a fingerprint, your genome is not something you can replace. It is permanent. It is predictive. It reveals not just who you are, but potentially what you may become vulnerable to, what conditions may affect you, what family lines connect to you, and what biological patterns place entire populations at risk. That is why genomic data is rapidly becoming one of the most sensitive national security assets on Earth. The danger begins with scale. Millions of people around the world have voluntarily submitted DNA to commercial ancestry and health testing companies. Others have participated in medical studies, donated biosamples, used fertility clinics, undergone genetic screening, or received hospital care that generated molecular data. Layer all of that together, and you do not just get isolated health records. You get a biological map of populations. And once such a map exists, it becomes strategically valuable. A hostile intelligence service does not need every genome on Earth to gain an advantage. It only needs enough data to identify trends, susceptibilities, familial links, population clusters, and probabilistic weaknesses. Over time, genomic information can be combined with traditional personal data, social media patterns, geolocation histories, financial records, and political profiling to create something far more invasive than ordinary surveillance. It becomes predictive human targeting. That means the issue is no longer just privacy. It is sovereignty. Because when foreign actors gain access to large-scale genetic data from another nation's population, they may acquire insight into health vulnerabilities, military readiness patterns, demographic risks, biomedical research trajectories, and the biological characteristics of specific communities. That is the point at which DNA becomes geopolitically relevant. The most alarming fears center on the possibility of ethnic-specific or genetically targeted bioweapons. This is a subject often sensationalized in fiction, but the core security concern is not imaginary. If adversaries can analyze genetic variations that appear more frequently in certain populations, they may try to develop biological agents that exploit those patterns, whether perfectly or imperfectly. Even if such weapons are scientifically difficult to create with precision, the very pursuit of them would be strategically destabilizing. And importantly, National security threats do not require perfect execution. An adversary does not need a flawless, cinematic superweapon to cause massive disruption. It may be enough to create biological tools that disproportionately affect specific regions, demographics, or medically vulnerable groups. Even partial selectivity could introduce fear, chaos, diplomatic paralysis, and social breakdown. The psychological impact alone would be enormous. A society that believes its biology has been turned against it may respond with panic, suspicion, xenophobia, or retaliation long before investigators establish the facts. But bioweapons are only one side of the threat. The other side is blackmail, coercion, and strategic profiling. Genomic data can reveal predispositions to diseases, mental health conditions, inherited disorders, fertility issues, addiction risks, and family relationships people may not even know about themselves. Imagine an intelligence service obtaining the DNA-linked health profile of a senior diplomat, military officer, tech executive, intelligence analyst, or rising political figure. Imagine learning that a decision-maker has a high probability of developing a stigmatized illness, carries a heritable condition they have concealed, or has a family connection they never disclosed. That information could be used to pressure, discredit, recruit, manipulate, or preemptively neutralize targets. Even where the science remains probable rather than certain, intelligence services do not require absolute certainty to exploit vulnerability. They only need material that is credible enough to influence behavior behind closed doors. That is how predictive blackmail works. It weaponizes possibility. And genomic data becomes even more dangerous when combined with family linkage. Your DNA does not belong only to you. It implicates relatives, parents, siblings, children, cousins, entire ancestral lines. One person uploading a genetic profile can indirectly expose a network of biological relationships, including individuals who never consented. That means a foreign actor breaching or infiltrating a commercial ancestry platform may gain not just isolated samples, but relational maps of families and communities. In intelligence terms, that is extraordinary. It allows identity resolution. It allows kinship tracing. It allows analysts to connect aliases, hidden lineages, adoption histories, fertility donations, undisclosed paternity, and diaspora networks. In some cases, it could even help identify covert personnel or sensitive individuals through relatives who used consumer testing services casually, never imagining national security was part of the equation. This is where the public conversation often lags behind reality. Many people still think of DNA kits as novelty products, a pie chart of ancestry, a wellness report, a fun gift. But once aggregated at scale, genetic data becomes infrastructure. It becomes a strategic database with implications far beyond consumer curiosity. And those implications expand when foreign investment, overseas cloud storage, third-party partnerships, and cross-border research access enter the picture. Not every breach looks like a hack. Sometimes access comes through acquisition, sometimes through joint ventures, sometimes through obscure data brokers, sometimes through poorly governed research collaborations, sometimes through legal requests in foreign jurisdictions, sometimes through insiders, sometimes through software supply chains. The theft of genomic intelligence may be quiet, incremental, and buried in commercial normalcy. That is why genomic espionage is so difficult to confront. It hides inside legitimate systems. Hospitals collect data for care. Researchers collect it for science. Biotech firms collect it for innovation. Ancestry companies collect it for consumer products. Governments collect it for public health and forensics. Each use case can be justified independently. But once those streams intersect, the attack surface becomes enormous. And unlike conventional cyber intrusions, the consequences of genomic compromise may unfold over years or decades. A stolen military document loses value with time. A stolen password can be reset. A compromised genome remains compromised indefinitely. As analytic techniques improve, old DNA samples may reveal new intelligence that was impossible to extract when they were first collected. That means the strategic value of stolen genetic data may actually increase over time. This is what makes the genomic frontier uniquely dangerous. It is both intimate and durable. It also raises a profound political question. Who owns biological information? The individual, the family, the company that sequences it, the lab that stores it, the state that regulates it. The answer remains unsettled in many countries, and that ambiguity creates openings for abuse. Democratic societies are especially vulnerable because they often treat data through fragmented legal categories. Health data here, consumer data there, research exemptions elsewhere, national security considerations somewhere off in a separate silo. But genomes do not respect bureaucratic categories. The same sequence can be medical, commercial, forensic, genealogical, and strategic all at once. That means policy built for yesterday's data economy is no longer enough. What is needed is a doctrine that recognizes genomic information as critical infrastructure, not metaphorically, operationally. Just as states protect energy grids, telecommunications backbones, satellite systems, and financial clearing networks, they may increasingly need to treat large-scale genomic repositories as national security assets, requiring hardened cybersecurity, strict jurisdictional controls, supply chain scrutiny, transparency mandates, and limits on foreign access. That does not mean shutting down medical research or halting life-saving innovation. It means acknowledging reality. If DNA data can be exploited at population scale, then its protection is not merely an individual consumer issue. It is a matter of collective defense. There is another layer to this story that makes it even more unsettling. Consent in the genomic era is often functionally meaningless. Most people do not read dense terms of service. Most cannot evaluate downstream research partnerships or data-sharing clauses. Most do not understand how de-identified genomic data can sometimes be re-identified when combined with other datasets. And most certainly do not imagine that a recreational ancestry upload might someday contribute, however indirectly, to foreign intelligence mapping. So even when people technically consent, the consent is shallow. And shallow consent is a weak shield against strategic exploitation. Meanwhile, advances in AI make the problem worse. Machine learning systems can detect patterns across gigantic biomedical datasets, infer missing attributes, predict disease susceptibility, and correlate genetic markers with other forms of personal information. AI does not create the genomic threat, but it dramatically scales the speed and depth of extraction. In other words, If DNA is the raw material, AI is the refinery. Together, they create the possibility of highly automated biological intelligence. This could affect not only civilian populations, but also military planning. A nation with access to aggregated genomic data might study troop health trends, resilience markers, population-level disease exposure, or medical dependency patterns. It might shape disinformation campaigns around public health fears. It might target supply chains for drugs used disproportionately by certain groups. It might exploit knowledge of inherited conditions in elite families or strategic industries. Again, not all of this requires futuristic bioweapons. Sometimes information superiority is the weapon. That is the real theme running through genomic espionage. The genome is valuable because it collapses the boundary between the biological and the informational. It turns the body into data and then turns that data into leverage. And leverage is what intelligence services seek. To understand the gravity of this, think about the hierarchy of secrets. Most secrets are external. Documents, passwords, locations, plans. DNA is different because it is internal. It is the secret beneath the skin. It is a record of inheritance, susceptibility, and identity that precedes choice itself. When that layer becomes searchable, tradable, and strategically exploitable, the meaning of security changes. National defense can no longer be measured only in missiles, borders, and cyber walls. It must also include biological sovereignty. That phrase may sound abstract, but it points to something concrete: the right of a society to control how the biological data of its people is collected, stored, analyzed, transferred, and defended. Without that control, populations become legible to external power in unprecedented ways. And once a population is made legible, it can be modeled. Once modeled, it can be segmented. Once segmented, it can be targeted. Once targeted, it can be manipulated. That is the logic of the invisible battlefield. So what should democratic nations do? First, they need stronger legal classification of genomic datasets as high-sensitivity assets, with security standards far beyond ordinary consumer data rules. Second, cross-border transfer of large-scale genetic data should face serious scrutiny, especially where foreign adversarial access, opaque ownership structures, or weak legal safeguards are involved. Third, commercial ancestry and health testing firms need stricter transparency obligations around storage, partnerships, law enforcement access, research sharing, and breach disclosure. Fourth, public research institutions must adopt security models that reflect espionage risk, not just academic openness. Fifth, citizens need a more honest public education about what they are giving away when they hand over DNA. And finally, governments need international norms that treat genomic exploitation the way earlier generations learned to treat chemical and biological threats, as a zone requiring restraint, verification, and collective red lines. Will those measures eliminate the threat? No, but ignoring the problem guarantees strategic asymmetry. Open societies cannot afford to sleepwalk into a future where their populations become biological intelligence reservoirs for hostile states and opportunistic corporations alike. The deeper lesson here is unsettling but simple. In the digital age, the most valuable terrain is no longer always physical territory. Sometimes it is the map of human vulnerability itself. Sometimes it is the dataset that tells you who a people are, what they may fear, what may sicken them, what links them together, and how pressure applied at one biological weak point might ripple across an entire society. That is why genomic espionage belongs in the national security conversation now, not later. Because once enough DNA is collected, copied, sold, breached and modeled, recovery becomes almost impossible. The exposure is intergenerational. The compromise outlives headlines. And the people affected may never know which future decisions, medical, political, commercial or covert, were shaped by the silent extraction of their biological code. This is the strategic transformation of the human body into intelligence terrain. A frontier where secrecy no longer ends at the skin, where surveillance no longer stops at behavior, where power reaches inward, down to the molecular level. And that may become one of the defining contests of the century. Not only who controls land, not only who controls chips, not only who controls data, but who controls the code of life itself. If this documentary changed the way you see the digital world, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. More deep dives are coming on the hidden systems, silent conflicts, and emerging technologies reshaping our reality, so don't miss the next documentary.